That means I'm going to have to erase a few things, so forgive me, because I know you can't do this at home.
So basically, the right and left ventricles and atriums are going to switch?
No, no.
Oh.
Let me show you. This is probably. Okay. Now, I've just shown here, what I've done is I've redrawn this in such a way that you can see the pulmonary trunk coming off the anterior aspect of the right ventricle. So when the right ventricle contracts and forces close the tricuspid valve, what happens? The blood gets ejected through an open pulmonic valve. And so blood gets ejected and it's going to pass into the right or left lung. Okay. It's important to notice that during systole, the AV valves have to be closed. And the semilunar valves, both the pulmonic valve at the base of the pulmonary trunk here, and if later we show the aortic valve at the base of the aorta, they have to open during systole, so that blood can be ejected either into the pulmonary trunk or into the aorta.
Dr. Payne, are you saying systole or
Systole.
systole? Okay.
Like
S-Y-S-T-O-L-E.
blood pressure.
Okay.
Systole. I always thought, I'm too cheap for this, but I always thought one day I would get a personalized license plate for the back of my car, and I would put systole on it. Okay? You know how license plates tell something about you. Mine would be systole. Okay? Got to be a certain number of letters, by the way. Just saying.
So, when the tricuspid valve closes, blood gets ejected into the coronary trunk?
Into the pulmonary trunk.
Pulmonary trunk.
Right. Now, at the same time that the tricuspid valve is being forced closed, the mitral valve is closing at the same time. The events on the right side are occurring concomitantly with events on the left side. At the same time, the right ventricle is pumping blood, ejecting blood into the pulmonary trunk. The left ventricle is ejecting blood into the aorta. They're occurring concomitantly. That means at the same time. Okay? And in fact, with the onset of systole, let's put these terms in systole, diastole. With the onset of systole and the closure of the AV valves, as these valves snap closed, you hear a heart sound. We call that heart sound the S1 heart sound, or the first heart sound. You know, when you listen to the heart, it sounds something like this. Bum, 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 bum. Some people say lub, dub, lub, dub, lub, dub. That first sound, the lub, is called S1, and it's created by closure of these AV valves. Okay, that marks the onset of systole. Okay, so during systole, blood is being ejected into the pulmonary trunk and concomitantly into the aorta. The heart, the ventricles are doing this. Watch this closely. Okay, don't try this at home. I'm a trained professional. Systole, diastole, systole, diastole, systole, diastole. Okay, my hand represents the right or left ventricle. Okay? During systole, that ventricle contracts. During diastole, it relaxes. boom, 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 boom. Notice that when it begins to contract, boom, that first heart sound is created by closure of the AV valves. Okay? And as these valves close, blood gets ejected. Okay? Now, following the ejection of blood, the ventricles begin to relax. Okay? As the ventricles begin to relax, what do you think happens to pressure within the ventricle? It's falling. It's falling. Because now the ventricles have emptied most of their contents and the chamber size is increasing. Now, as the pressure on this side of the pulmonic valve falls, okay, this valve is going to close. Okay? And when that valve closes at the onset of diastole, closure of the semilunar valves at the onset of diastole creates a second heart sound, S2. So whereas S1 is created by closure of the AV valves, S2, and that occurs at the onset of systole, S2 is created by closure of the semilunar valves at the onset of diastole. Of course, when this valve closes, what do you think happens to the AV valve? It opens. It opens. And so that during diastole, then blood again fills from the upper chambers. All right, let's review. During systole, and let's compare semilunar and AV valves. During systole, the semilunar valves are open and the AV valves are closed. With the onset of diastole, the semilunar valves close and the AV valves open. Okay, you might have to think of that. Think about that a little bit. It makes sense that during systole, these semilunar valves have to open in order for blood to be ejected. And if you know the semilunar valves are open, then the AV valves have to be closed. And the closure of the AV valves prevents regurgitation of blood into the upper chambers. The opposite occurs during diastole. During diastole, the closure, when the ventricles relax, the closure of the semilunar valves prevents regurgitation of blood back to the ventricle. Okay? And at the same time, the AV valves open so that the ventricles can now fill with blood prior to the next systole.
Are there any muscles associated with the semilunar valves?
No, the semilunar valves are simply cusps
They're just
that
collected.
extend from the walls of those great vessels. There are no portae tendinae, there are no papillary muscles associated with them. They're like little pockets that extend out. Okay. Now, this blood, when the right ventricle contracts, this blood travels to the lungs. Okay? And it picks up oxygen. Okay? That's what's happening. Blood that is being delivered by the pulmonary vessels, the pulmonary arteries, picks up oxygen within the lungs. Okay? Let's draw the lungs here. Here's one big old lung. And here's another big old lung over here. Okay? Now, emerging from each lung are going to be two pulmonary veins. And they're going to empty into the left atrium. Okay? Let's look at these would be real. We're doing this and this. So now oxygenated blood is coming from the lungs. and is beginning to fill up the left atrium. Now, during diastole, the mitral valve opens. Okay. Okay. And that allows the blood that has now become oxygenated from the lungs to move down into the ventricle. All right. I am going to modify this picture one more time. I said that the ascending aorta comes off the left ventricle, but it moves up behind the pulmonary trunk. So now I have to take this picture that's been sectioned from the very anterior aspect and pull it back just a little bit behind the pulmonary trunk. So watch what we're going to do. Through the magic of whiteboard, and I'm going to erase some things, so please forgive me. I know it's bothers people. Okay. So that's how we're going to go on. I'll put in red, so that maybe red distinguishes itself. So here, coming off the left ventricle, behind the pulmonary trunk, is the ascending aorta, which then comes around like this. The arch. Okay? So, and let's draw so you can see here the aortic valve. Okay. And then here, let's finish up the aortic valves. Let's rearrange so it comes like this. Okay. So during systole, when the ventricle contracts, it closes the mitral valve, and blood then gets ejected through an open aortic valve into the aorta. Notice that the ascending aorta sits behind the pulmonary trunk. That blood that's being ejected into the ascending aorta is now oxygenated. It's picked up oxygen from the lungs, and now it's being pumped into the ascending aorta and delivered via its branches to all parts of the body, except for the lungs. Okay. I want to say something that's extremely important. Extremely important. Big time important. When I show you a section of the heart on the practical, one of the first things you have to do is decide which is the right side and what's the left side. Okay? The right ventricular free wall is thinner than the left ventricular free wall. And there's a good reason for this. We can think of the heart as two separate pumps. The right ventricle pumps blood through the pulmonary circuit to the lungs. That pulmonary circuit is a low pressure circuit. In other words, the right ventricle doesn't have to generate a lot of pressure to inject blood right next door, okay, with enough force then to come right back. Whereas the left ventricle is part of a high pressure circuit, the systemic circuit. When we say systemic, we mean the entire body. So the left ventricle, when it pumps blood, it's pumping it to the top of the head and the bottom of the feet, and with enough force that once it reaches those tissues and gives up oxygen, it's got to get back. So the left ventricle, we think of it as the systemic pump. It's part of the systemic circuit, which is a higher pressure circuit. Blood's got to be pumped with greater force. And so while the right ventricle is bench pressing 20 pounds, the left ventricle is bench pressing 200. Okay? How many people here like to go to the gym? Chris? Alyssa? Okay, good, good. What you'll notice is that those people who are bench pressing like 300 or 400 pounds, okay, they're built. They got big muscles. Those muscles hypertrophy. They get larger. Those people that are bench pressing 10 pounds, just a bar without any weights on it, they're not as built. The muscle doesn't hypertrophy as much. Same thing true here in the heart. The free wall of the left ventricle, because it's performing more work, it thickens, okay? It's more hypertrophy. So when you look at a section of the heart, okay, the side, the ventricle with the thicker free wall is the left ventricle. The side which has the thinner free wall is the side of the right ventricle. That makes sense, huh?
Mhm.
One's a high pressure circuit, one is a relatively lower pressure circuit.
Thank you for that information.
What's that? About the thick wall?
Yeah, I feel like most teachers probably wouldn't tell you that. They would just let you figure it out on your own.
Yeah, well, you would have figured it out eventually. Now, so this is a lecture, by the way, that can be very, very confusing. How did y'all do with this part so far? I will tell you this. If you haven't read the book, if you read the book, okay, it'll make it easier to understand because you have to break it down into little pieces. Those of you who have already read the book, it probably made this lecture a little bit more understandable because you were already somewhat familiar. Kat, had you read already?
Yeah.
Did it make it a little bit easier?
Yes.
Okay. But if you're waiting, then read the book now, and it will make things a little bit easier. Okay. Let's go now. And what we're going to do now really is just very little new information. Now we're going to look at pictures.
So like clinical?
Yeah, it's like that. But before so, talk about how left ventricle has a much thicker wall than the right ventricle. You should be able to recognize it. It's like recognizing the difference, I'm thinking, between a hippo and a zippo. Okay. It's easy to tell the difference between a hippo and a zippo, right? One's a little lighter. Okay. A zippo is one of those little lighters. Okay, a hippo is like a big old animal.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
and size.
I
It's
know
a size.
what you're saying.
Yeah, a zippo is a little lighter.